First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
Our Unitarian Universalist Association selects a common read each year, recommended for Unitarian Universalists across the country to read and talk about. But didn't I already preach about this year's common read? It was the book by Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg on repentance and repair, where she drew on the medieval Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides to lay out and explain some really helpful ways that we can repair relationships that have been wounded or broken. I preached about it. We had classes about the book. Ruttenberg's book was actually the common read for 2023-24, and we were getting to it a little later in 2024. There is another common read for 2024-25, and that is this collection of first-person accounts celebrating trans and non-binary people and their families, titled Authentic Selves. Each of its 35 chapters tells the story of a trans or non-binary person, and many of the chapters also have statements from family members telling their story, partners, siblings, often parents. What's amazing and moving about the amassed stories is how different they are, how many permutations there are of assigned at birth, which might be male, female, or intersex, with gender identity, which might be male, female, both, neither, something else, or none, with gender expression, for which the possibilities are as infinite as the person's imagination. It's a great book to start looking at as we prepare here for hosting the Trans Lives Festival coming up on Saturday. Our job, our mission here at First Unitarian Des Moines, is to love radically, grow ethically and spiritually, and serve justly. Today, let's focus on that first one. Love radically. To love radically means unconditional acceptance, compassion, and kindness. It doesn't mean that protective use of force is never called for, but a commitment to love radically does make us more hesitant to resort to it. Loving radically means curbing the fearful impulse to employ protective force first and ask questions later. So, yes, this does mean taking some risks sometimes. There's a chance of being vulnerable and getting hurt when we could have been more protective. So radical love requires the courage to take that chance, to ask questions first, unless the danger is immediate and extreme. Radical love also requires the courage to stand against injustice, oppression, and discrimination, even when that is difficult. To love radically means even when we do have to go to protective use of force, we do so in the most compassionate, kind, and accepting way that we can. Loving radically means not judging, not blaming, not expecting others to change. Loving radically means recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their gender, gender identity, or gender expression. Loving radically means recognizing and challenging our own biases, privileges, and limitations to become a more loving and compassionate person. And because it is radical, it is countercultural. Loving radically is not transactional. It welcomes reciprocity, but it stays away from any precise measurement of who has done what for whom. Radical love requires being imprecise about that, because being precise means you're being transactional, means you're thinking quid pro quo rather than beautifully vague reciprocity. Radical love includes yourself, so it doesn't mean being a slave to other people's needs. You also count, your needs also count. But radical love recognizes that one of those needs is to help others because their suffering is yours. So no one has to earn your positive regard, your respect of their dignity. To love radically is to commit to unconditional solidarity in which all beings, just, because they exist, are worthy of being loved. Radical love refuses to flatten people into roles, labels, or projections. Radical love's enemy is judgmentalism, and its allies are curiosity and a willingness to embrace complexity. To love radically is a deliberate act of resistance, of liberation, and of deep presence, disrupting systems that thrive on fear, hierarchy, and disconnection, systems that benefit when we believe we are separate, unlovable, or alone. There's a close connection between love and understanding, as the Vietnamese Zen monk Thich Nhat Hanh has emphasized. He says, understanding and love are not two separate things, but just one. To develop understanding, you have to practice looking at all living beings with the eyes of compassion. When you understand, you cannot help but love. And when you love, you naturally act in a way that can relieve the suffering of people. He added, understanding is the very foundation of love. If understanding is not there, no matter how hard you try, you cannot love. Understanding is love's other name. If you don't understand, you can't love. So the better we understand, the better we can love. And there are some things we all simply need to know about gender identity. Many of us do know these things, but I need to rehearse them to make sure we're all on that page so that we can all understand and love radically. Gender identity means a person's internal, deeply held sense of their own gender, which may or may not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. Gender identity is different from gender expression, which is how one presents oneself to the world. In our culture, clothing styles, hairstyles, makeup, and certain behaviors are key ways that a person expresses gender. A person's gender identity can be cisgender, aligning with sex assigned at birth, transgender, not aligning with the sex assigned at birth, non-binary, identifying as neither male nor female or both, genderqueer, identifying as something outside the traditional male-female binary, agender, not identifying with any gender, or bigender, identifying as both male and female. There's a lot of possibilities, and it can be hard to understand. But love helps us understand, and understanding helps us love. We should all be familiar with the formula insistent, persistent, and consistent. Children do sometimes have a phase of experimenting with or exploring gender expressions. Of course, give them the space to experiment and explore. It can be fun to try out all kinds of roles and expressions. If they are genuinely transgender, then they will be insistent, persistent, and consistent about it. Insistent: is the child you had thought was a girl adamant that Z is a boy? Or is the child you had thought was a boy adamant that Z is a girl? Persistent: the child's cross-gender identification persists over time. And consistent is the child's cross-gender identification is consistent across different contexts with different people, rather than just being something Z expresses at home or with certain friends. There seems to be an increase in this country in transgender identification. In a recent survey of over 2 million American adults, the number of 18 to 24-year-olds identifying as transgender quintupled in 9 years, from 2014 to 2023, from 0.6% to 3% of that age cohort. We are not sure why these numbers are going up. Growing awareness and acceptance, decreased stigma may be a factor in more people being willing to come out. Improved data collection, as survey design has improved, may be a factor in getting more accurate numbers on what has long been true. Increased access to information might be leading people to recognize themselves in an identity description they would not otherwise have thought possible. Some research also suggests that there might be environmental factors, such as prenatal hormonal exposure, that contributes to the development of transgender identities. We don't know how much weight each of those factors would have, but whatever accounts for the growing numbers, it is not mass satanic possession. Lots of cultures have a role for non-binary people. The Navajo, Nadlihi, could have been assigned either male or female at birth, but they embody both male and female qualities and fill a respected spiritual and social role. The Lakota, Wintke, is typically a male-bodied person who takes on a female role in ceremonial and artistic functions. The Zuni Lamana are male-bodied in traditionally female roles, respected as mediators and craftspeople. The Omaha Mixuga have cross-gender roles, often involved in rituals or crafts. The Cheyenne Hamene are half man, half woman, individuals with spiritual or social importance. The Cree recognize gender-diverse people with unique roles. The Ojibwe language has a term for people with a man's body and a woman's heart. Looking beyond indigenous North American cultures, in Samoa, the traditional culture had fa'afafine, people assigned male at birth who live and identify in a feminine gender role and are recognized, they are a recognized third gender with social functions seen as natural and important. Cultures from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal have the hijra, also recognized as a third gender. Hijra can include transgender women, intersex people, and others who don't fit neatly into the male-female binary. They traditionally had important ceremonial roles. In Thailand, the Kathoi are transgender women or effeminate men, visible often in entertainment or beauty industries. Gender fluidity is normalized. In parts of the Balkans, particularly northern Albania, some women take on male gender roles and live as men. They are called sworn virgins, and they are treated as such, though it's not based on an internal gender identity as we think of it. The Bugis culture in Indonesia recognizes 5 genders: men, women, masculine women, feminine men, and bisu, which are gender-transcendent shamans. Gender is a cultural construct. So, of course, all the ways non-binary genders are constructed varies from culture to culture. Most cultures have found some need to recognize and form norms for more than just 2 genders. And that's an overview of some of the basics that I want us all to just be aware of. After the interlude, I will tell you my gender story. So for our interlude, something where the harmonies are in more than 2 parts. So in the spirit of the book, Authentic Selves, people telling their stories and finding their way to who they are, I wanted to tell you this morning my own personal story with the concept of gender identity, sharing my reflections and experiences about my journey towards self-understanding might help you think about yours. I am not sure I have a gender identity. It is clear that I have a sexual orientation. As a teenager, I was interested in girls in a way that was strange and mysterious and terribly awkward and yet undeniable. My inner authentic me had this desire for intimacy with someone from roughly half of humanity that felt quite different from the kind of relationships I felt inclined to have with people from the other roughly half of humanity. It was very puzzling. It was very ordinary, apparently, and yet still very puzzling. This meant that other people's gender mattered to me in that way. My own gender, not so much. For some people, it is the other way around. For a bisexual person, a prospective romantic partner's gender doesn't matter to them in that way, though their own sense of gender identity maybe does. I don't mind presenting as male, and I have the biology that commonly goes with that, testosterone and reproductive organs and facial hair and a low voice and male pattern baldness and height that's average for a man but is 2 standard deviations above the mean height of women, larger hands, more pronounced Adam's apple, the whole package of traits that often but not always goes together. Living life the way that the society I grew up in expects of males has just been easier. The wardrobe is easier, the socially expected grooming is quicker, and I've gotten accustomed to being treated the way that society treats people that it thinks are men. But none of that means I identify as male. It just means others identify me as a male, and I acquiesce to that. If, from my birth, my parents had told me I was a girl, had dressed me the way other girls were dressed, had grown my hair long and put bows or ribbons in it occasionally, taught me to value being pretty, and had somehow kept me from finding out about the anatomical differences between me and the other girls, I suspect I would have gone along with that too. I don't feel the presence of an inner, true, and authentic me in there that would have rebelled against gender assignment as a girl. Nothing that would have told me this feels wrong. I feel fine with how I'm perceived and treated as a man, but I don't feel a strong internal sense of maleness beyond that. It is possible I am deluded. This is always worth considering. I might be so cisgendered that I don't even notice it, so comfortable in the match between my assigned at birth sex and the gender expression I am content to display that I imagine I would be comfortable in any gender when, in fact, I would not have been as comfortable being raised a girl as I imagine I would have been. I don't know. Maybe. There are some clues, however, that suggest I might not be self-deluded to think I don't have a gender identity. First, the literature on gender identity recognizes people like me. For instance, I read that a lot of cis men and cis women don't feel a stronger gender identity, but don't notice it because everything about their social role feels frictionless. The idea that everyone must have a deep internal self-defining gender identity is itself a kind of cultural assumption, but not a universal truth. Some people have strong gender identities, others don't. That's all part of the natural diversity of human experience. End quote. For a second clue, that maybe inner gender ambiguity is for me authentic rather than delusional, there is the matter of my name. My name is Stephen Meredith Garmon. From birth through 9th grade, I went by Stephen, and in high school shortened it to Steve. And when I went away to college at age 18, I decided to go by my middle name. I happened to share that middle name with my father, who was Gerald Meredith Garmon, and with his father, who was Orion Meredith Garmon, which means that his initials were OMG. Apparently, naming boys Meredith is a Welsh thing, and my paternal line goes through Wales. Partly, I liked the hint of dark romance about it. Meredith seemed to my 18-year-old self like the kind of person you might find brooding on a moor, like Heathcliff or Ravenel. But mostly, I liked that it was gender ambiguous. In fact, in the US, it's much more often a girl's name, and that fact was attractive to me. I wanted a gender ambiguous name, and it was convenient that I didn't have to make one up, but could switch to using one I happened to already have. It was 1977, and people didn't know much about transgenderism. I had never heard the phrase gender non-binary. The term more often used back then was transvestite, which was usually understood to mean men dressing in women's clothing. That was their kink, as we say today, but we didn't understand it the way we now understand gender identity. I didn't want to change the way I dressed, which was invariably sneakers, blue jeans, and a t-shirt in summer and a sweatshirt in winter, which was also the uniform of a lot of the young women at my college. I was in favor of unisex everything, down with constraining gender norms. I was not interested in presenting as female because I disapproved of the very idea that there should be any such thing as presenting as female. We should all, I felt, abandon the concepts of masculinity and femininity in favor of simply human. When I look back on that 18-year-old, he was actually pretty militantly anti-gender identity. 48 years have gone by since then, and the world has changed, and I've changed. I was wrong to think that gender identity was as dispensable as back then I hoped it was. For a lot of people, it's clear to me now, gender identity is no more dispensable for them than sexual orientation is for me. But the fact that I thought that way as an adolescent does suggest that being agender-ish is, for me, authentic. I have been, from youth, pretty insistent, persistent, and consistent about that. You have been hearing it when I declare my pronouns as ze/zir or he, him. For many people, being a boy or man, or being a girl or woman, or even being both or being neither, is a crucial part of their sense of who they are. I'm just not one of them. And for those who do have a clear gender identity, for some it matches what they were assigned at birth, and for others, it just doesn't. The key, as the book title suggests, is finding and being our authentic selves. But what is authentic for you? We are, all of us, a hodgepodge of conflicting desires trying to balance. We have internalized messages, some of which contradict other messages we have internalized. We try to construct the most coherent sense of who we are and whose we are that we can, but it's never fully coherent. We all have some tensions and contradictions in us. So how do we be authentic? Well, let's go back to that idea of loving radically and apply that to ourselves. Remember, radical love is not transactional. Loving radically yourself is also not transactional. If you find yourself thinking, if I be this way, there's something I'll get out of it, that's being transactional with yourself. You've got an internal quid pro quo going on. It's not that transactions are always wrong. You go to the grocery store, you buy groceries, it's a transaction. You need the food, the people at the store and all their suppliers need your money to meet their needs. We need transactions, but we also need close relationships with family and friends that aren't transactional, that are reciprocal in an imprecise way. I called it beautifully vague reciprocity. And sometimes we need to be transactional with ourselves for a bit. We tell ourselves, I don't really want to be in this role. It feels a little awkward for me, or a lot awkward, but I can do it for now, and it'll help me meet some need and keep me safe. To love radically ourselves means that we aren't always so transactional. Sometimes there's being what you want to be just for its own sake, not because it gets you anything you could put your finger on. It's at those times that we are our authentic selves. So, may your authentic self, whatever it might be, shine ever brighter. Amen.